what is this thing called purpose, and what does it really do?
That is Nick Craig, the author of Leading from Purpose, Clarity and the Confidence to Act When It Matters Most, published in June 2018. Since 2006, Nick's firm, Core Leadership Institute, has helped more than 10,000 leaders discover and lead from purpose. In this episode, Nick shares his perspective on what purpose is, how to discover your purpose, the benefits of leading from purpose. While his firm primarily leads private workshops within organizations, they do have 2 workshops coming up that are open to the public, in Boston from October 18 to 19, and in London from December 4th through 5th, 2018. You can learn more and sign up for one of their events at their website, coreleader.com. Hey, Nick, it is great to have you on the show.
It is great to be here, Will. Thank you.
Nick, we met, I think, 9 or 10 years ago at a creativity and personal mastery retreat organized by Srikamar Rao, and you were one of the presenters at that and shared your Crucible story. I was wondering if we could start. Could you share, one of the Crucible stories for you?
Okay, sure. I'd be happy to do that. And in the context of the work that we're going to be talking about around purpose, one of the things is that purpose. One of the places purpose shows up for us is in times in which we most are challenged. In some ways, it's the time when everything gets stripped away, and I think that's probably very true for me. Different people have different accesses to purpose, but this is one of them. Probably one of the crucibles that those in your audience can appreciate is when I went from I was working for a consulting firm, and I had gone from I got a master's in organizational development and was working for a big corp company and doing some organizational development work. And I got pulled out to go work for this consulting firm. And it turned out that I had a gift I didn't realize I had, which is I could convince people while sitting on an airplane that they should work with us. For those of you listening, you know how amazing that is when you give someone a card on an airplane and then they call you afterwards and you're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So for whatever reason, I seem to have an ability to make that happen. And what that did is as I went into this consulting firm, I became very, very successful very quickly. And the upside was that I got to do some really cool things and I got to have real control over what I did. But the downside is that I sort of didn't have to follow all the normal path of growing up. So at some point, I got a little over busy, and I ended up crashing from the perspective of just being tired. And I ended up working for some of the guys who I never had to work for before, and they were there to teach me a lesson, I guess is the best way to describe it. And many of those lessons included me being the one who missed my flights while they caught theirs as I took the rental car back and other things. So I got quickly tired of that, and I ended up deciding to go take an engagement in which I was replacing McKinsey to run this large leadership program. And I was told by everybody that the guy who ran it was ethically compromised to the point where he would basically leave me or everybody else under the bus. But I thought that I was smart enough and quick enough that I could solve this. So I did this engagement. So 6 months in, we're at MIT. It's the last week of a program that we're doing there. Everything's been going really well. I'm excited because the night before, a bunch of others of the crew who had been helping out were getting awards. So on the last day, I figured I was going to get my award. And I did. I got fired in front of everyone.
Ouch.
It came as a shock to me and everyone else. What happened is that the guy who was running this program, who had ethical challenges, had gotten gotten a promotion as long as he could give this program to another consulting group for the following year. But the problem was is I was doing so well with my evaluations. Unless he fired me right then, there'd be no way they could get rid of me. Well, he fired. So having been on top of the world, when you go to the Oscars and they instead of giving you an Oscar, they tell you you're fired, it's a really humbling thing. And for me, it actually was even more devastating, and I ended up getting really physically sick. Sleeping for 3 months, I basically couldn't get out of bed. And the consulting firm that I was working for decided that I was a little too unpredictable. And so they said, you might want to go do something else for a living. My wife had an equal perception. And she said, I don't think we should be together anymore. Okay?
Wow.
And so here I am, getting divorced, having to pay my to-be ex-wife a portion of a salary that I'm no longer making. Oh, God, that was a really, really fun moment. And the thing is that when you're really sick physically, you don't worry about things in the same way. So the good news is I was too sick to be worried about all this. It took me probably, 6 to 9 months before I got physically to the point where I could do anything. And I ended up leaving, not leaving, but being asked to leave this consulting practice as well as the marriage I was in. And proceeded to really realize that the key to who I was and what really mattered to me was really finding clients to work with who had incredibly high values and high ethics, which I ended up finding one who thought I was the weirdest consultant because I kept torturing them around their values and ethics to the point where he said, "You're not a normal consultant, so we're going to hire you." Now, the interesting, if I look at that challenging life experience, took me about, probably took me 10 years for me to finally go look at the story and say, well, what is it? What is the story really trying to tell me? And in some ways, what it was really trying to tell me was that I was an arrogant character, to say the least, on the front end of that. And the universe needed to remind me or help show me the deeper truth about who I really was and what really mattered. And so as a result of that whole experience, I realized that anybody who hadn't been humbled at that level in their life would probably not be someone I could trust. Because I would not trust the person I was before I had had that experience. And in some ways, it also sort of catapulted me over the years to the work I do now, where these crucible stories and having people tell these crucible stories is part of the key ingredient in understanding what is the deeper purpose that's been leading us all our lives. So, Mr. Will, I think I answered your question, but I'm happy to go in any direction from here you'd like me to go.
No, you did. And let's use that as a segue to talk about your new book, Leading from Purpose. So I'm almost done reading it. It's really great. And for the listeners who haven't yet picked it up, maybe we could start by talking through kind of the key parts, like what is purpose? How do you determine your own purpose? And then what's the impact once you find it? Maybe, could you start with that first part, just what is purpose, and then we can go on to how do you determine what your own purpose is?
Yeah, so let me do that. And so let me just do a preface around that. The gift of the last 10 years is I probably ran programs in which we've worked with at least 10,000 executives from every industry, every demographic, every part of the world, and really going deep on this conversation about who are they and also what is the deeper purpose that's leading them. And I'm talking about everything from oil and gas guys in Oklahoma City to guys who sell power tools in Australia to faculty at West Point. And the reason I wrote the book is because I kept reading all this stuff around what purpose is about, and I said, no, that is not purpose. That is a Disney version, but the real version of purpose is a little more edgy. Very powerful, but boy, I think people need to really understand and have an owner's manual around purpose that is the truth that I see and experience when I'm working with many of these leaders around the world. So in some ways, that's really the reason why I wrote the book and want people to be able to read the book, is so that you really understand what is this thing called purpose, and what does it really do. And so first of all, what is it? There is the definition I have come to feel is the most authentic. Is purpose is the unique gift that you bring to the world. And what I mean by that is each of us show up in an event, a meeting, a conversation. And the truth is that what we do is unique to us and different than what anybody else would do. And the real ultimate question for all of us would be is if we were pulled out of our life and replaced with someone equally as good-looking and smart and compelling as we are. 3 months later, if we were to interview everyone, what would they say they most missed? Okay, so it's not about skills, it's not about capabilities, it's about that thing that we bring that nobody else does. And so for me, that is purpose. Okay, and it is something that has been with us all of our life. It will be with us when we were. It was with us when we were 2. It'll still be with us when we're 102. We don't retire from it either. It doesn't change. We might use different language to describe it over time, but it doesn't change. And so that's the real essence of what purpose is. And the challenge for most of us is most of us don't know what is the unique gift that we bring to the world around us. And then we chase after everybody else's idea of what we should be. And many of the executives I've worked with, most of them have gotten to be very, very successful. But the final step in their career isn't about skill or capability, it's about who they are. And the challenge is most of them don't know. So helping them know that and helping them know that purpose that is theirs so they can lead fully from it has been probably the biggest thing that I've found has the biggest impact on helping them step into the gift.
Can you give us some examples, Nick, of give us some examples of 2 or 3 to kind of illustrate how they might be different from one another?
Well, let's give you. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So one of the guys I've had the privilege of working with is this guy, Jostein Solheim, who is the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. Okay. So in 2011, he and I were working together, and he's finishing up a 2-year turnaround of Ben & Jerry's from negative growth to positive growth. And he's been promised this big promotion to corporate and all the money that goes along with it. But he figures we work on his purpose, and his purpose turns out to be is to thrive in ambiguity and paradox for things that really matter. Okay? Now, those kind of purposes, the interesting thing about a purpose like that is it means that you are the happiest when all hell breaks loose. Okay? And when things are going well, for the most part, you're bored. Okay? And you want to be in a place where things are really crazy, but it really makes a difference. Well, it turns out that the job he was in was the job that would make him most able to lead from his purpose. But he was being asked to take a promotion, move to London. His family would be happy. Everybody would be happy except for him. So he turns it down. First person ever in the company he worked for who ever turned down a 2-step promotion. The whole system literally had a heart attack.
This does not compute.
He calls me up and he says, okay, you won't believe what's happening. And I'm laughing. I says, well, your purpose, your purpose is that's what your purpose does. And he stayed for 8 years. Okay. And he grew Ben & Jerry's from half a billion to $1 billion in revenue. Okay. And one of his crowning moments, after he had his clearest saying, is that his head of marketing came to him with this idea for a flavor. And he said, every previous guy who's been sitting in that chair you're sitting in has turned this idea down. But I think now that you've decided to stay, and that we now know what your purpose is, that I think this is a perfect flavor for us to introduce in the Christmas season this year. So this guy says, look, I got this flavor. It's based on a Alec Baldwin skit from Saturday Night Live. And he says, and it's basically the Saturday Night Live skit called Sweaty Balls. Okay? And it's about a Christmas candy. Anyway, but obviously it's got an interesting side message, okay? He says, we want to launch Sweaty Balls. Einstein's first reaction is, there's no way we're going to do that. And then he said, you know what? We are going to do it. Oh, my God. The system thought he was completely crazy. It ended up being the most sought-after thing in the Christmas season in 2011. Every major retailer delisted them. The CEO of Walmart was apparently heard to say in a big meeting that we are not going to sell Sweaty Balls. So he did it because what he realized was that for him to truly own this iconic brand, he had to fully step into its purpose. Okay. Now he got in trouble with mothers groups and all kinds of things. All of his bosses were pissed. But it was this major moment in which everybody at Ben & Jerry's knew that they were fully, once again, in control of their destiny. Okay. So that's one example. Okay. Of what's the essence, the ingredients of what purpose is. Another example or story is, so I'm working, I get to work with some interesting companies, but I never thought Dutch bankers would want to do stuff on purpose. I mean, what? Well, we've been rolling out a program with a major Dutch bank, and we're rolling out purpose to the top 5,000 right now. Okay? All right, whatever. It's a bank. But so I'm sitting down across from this guy who's the treasurer. I don't know about most of you who are listening, but I have never figured out what a treasurer does for a company. I can, the CFO, I understand. Okay, all the other things. Okay, the finance guys, whatever.
I think they keep the treasure. Yeah.
Well, they keep exactly. They got a little. What do they do? Sit on top of a little treasure chest, or what? Well, basically, they're the. I don't know what normal ones do, but this bank guy says to me, he says, "Look, what we do is we're the bank within the bank. Basically, we hold all of the financial instruments that is used to allow us to lend money, all the bonds and everything." I'm like, oh, okay, this is a serious job. Okay, I'm like, ooh, okay. So I'm sitting there going, I wonder what this guy's purpose is. Right? So one of the places purpose resides in us is and one of these things that we do when we work with people is we have people tell their magical moments from their childhood. Now, some of us may have not had magic. Many of us, most of us, including me, did not have a magical childhood. Okay, but there are moments that were magical. Okay, so for this particular individual, he says, one of my most magical moments as a kid was, and he grew up in Europe, and they went camping in the woods in a place where there had been a World War I or World War II battle fought. Right? And so one day he just decides that he's going to start digging a hole, and he's going to find something. So he starts digging. He's digging. He's probably about 1.5 feet, 2 feet down, and he's still going. And everybody else is like, "Come on, let's go. Let's go do something else." And he hits something. Turns out he pulls up this metal, okay, that he takes home and keeps. And he tells a story to us, right? And then we're looking at the sort of all the data about who he is and how he operates. And his insight is that his purpose and the metaphor for his purpose is to always dig and find the metal. Now, I can't think of a better purpose for somebody who is the treasurer for a multinational bank. Because what that really says is that he's got the ability to know where to dig, right? And I go, oh my God, what a perfect match of purpose to roll. So, by the way, he calls his wife and says, here's what we're doing, here's what my purpose is. And she's quiet for a second. She says, so do you still have the medal? He says, yeah, it's in this little wooden box, and he explains where it is. And she goes and gets it and opens it, and she hears this gasp as she looks at this thing and says, oh, my God, that is so you. Okay? So two very different people, very different backgrounds, very different roles. And so this is, in some ways, this is the beauty of the clarity of knowing what is the purpose that has always been leading us, is that we can own this beautiful suit that only fits us, that allows us to see the world differently than other people would see it.
So in the book, Nick, you give some exercises on how the reader can work on finding the purpose. Could you maybe give an example or two of those here for listeners so they could start that journey?
Yeah, well, let's just wait. The three access points to purpose, all of them are about our stories in our life. And it's looking at what's the thread across the stories that jumps out. So there's three different access points, or main access points. One of them we've talked about is when we write down our most challenging life stories. And for some of us, there's a part of who we are that shows up in those that ends up being truly the essence of who we are. Okay, and that's one access point. One of the other access points is, as we were just talking about, is thinking back to what are our magical moments as a kid. Okay, whether it was playing football or baseball or swimming or watching. I have one guy whose metaphor is every day when he was a kid, after school, he would go lie in the grass in the backyard, and he would watch the airplanes go over, and then he would imagine himself on the plane and imagine where he would be going. Okay? And that metaphor just grabbed him, and his purpose is to help people be on the plane that helps them go on the adventure that they're meant to go on. Right? Now, wouldn't you love to have him as your boss? Right? So that's another access point. The third place is, for some of us, there's a passion that we've had in our life, and we may not even be doing it now. It may have been something that we did for some extended period of time, that most cases we probably weren't world-class at it, but we did it because it just fed the deeper part of who we are. And in there is a metaphor. Okay? In there is a metaphor. The World Cup just happened, and there's a number of people for which their growing up had soccer as a central element. And a number of them, I have one guy who, the metaphor for him of who his purpose is he was always what's referred to as a midfielder. Okay, so you're sort of in the middle of the field. He was a captain, and the beauty about that is that he could see what was going to happen and then help the whole team adjust in real time, and he had this ability to see what no one else could see. Well, that was his purpose. Okay, so those are the three places, and I think that the beauty of this is in writing down the stories. In the stories, as you read the stories and as you write the stories, you end up stepping into purpose. You may not know what the words are, or the sort of the, when we look at purpose statements, it's kind of like it's the title for the movie, but the movie is the stories. Okay? And so writing the stories is probably the most important thing for someone to do.
What's the impact that you've seen when someone does discover their purpose?
Well, let's talk about the visceral impact in the moment, and then we'll talk about the impact over time. So the visceral impact in the moment, there's a level of energy. The curious little kid inside of us jumps out. It's a sense of clarity about who we are and why our life is the way it is. All of this comes together when we discover what those words are that help us crystallize what is that purpose that's been leading us. And so when we run programs, we usually run programs that are lasting 2 or 3 days and so forth. When people discover that, the rest of us all know when it is a HR sugar-coated version or it's the real version. right? And when it's the real version, we all, including the person saying it, completely know it in that moment. And once they have it, it's like, oh my God, this is it. So I was working with this woman, and we were struggling to figure out what her purpose was. And she had these two parts of her. So one is that she loves to put on events, and she's been doing it her whole life. And one of the things she most loves is planning a birthday party. Okay, but what she does for a living is she actually plans big corporate leadership development training programs. Okay. But the other thing is that she always finds herself always in the limelight, even though she's not the key person. And the story she told is of when she was a kid, she was in the play. There was a play, Wizard of Oz, she was part of, and she was supposed to be Dorothy, but she didn't get Dorothy, so they made her a Munchkin. Now, there's no worse downgrade that you could have from going from Dorothy to being a Munchkin. I mean, it's like really. Now, the worst part was she was twice as tall as all the other kids who were Munchkin. Okay, so this was totally bad casting. Okay, but what happened was that the next day in the front page of the local little newspaper was a picture of her. Not a picture of the girl that was Dorothy, but of her being this oversized Munchkin with the other little Munchkins.
It's the giant Munchkin.
Well, okay, so we're sitting there because she says, I don't know what it is about my life, or my purpose, but it always has. I'm always doing sort of this thing behind the scenes, and then the spotlights are on me, and it's not like I want to be in the spotlight as much as the spotlight just seems to get me. And so we're looking at these two pieces, and we're like, okay, so how do you take these two things that don't fit together and put them in the same box together? Because in some sense, that's what happens for all of us with our purposes, is that, who we are is a paradox, and it's not supposed to fit in any normal box. If it did, it'd be boring, and there's nothing unique about that, right? So we played around with it. So here's what we came up with, and we came up with it, and when we both said it, I'm telling you, she transformed into, it was like a transformation in the moment. Her purpose is to be the magical Munchkin that plans your birthday party. Okay? Now, as you say that, now this is a really serious, high-level, senior executive, but as we said it, it was so true as to the combination of who she is. Okay? Her life will never, ever be the same. Now, it's not as if this wasn't where she was operating from already. It's like, this has been happening all her life. But now, she's fully got it. Now she has such much better access to it on an ongoing basis. The issue here around purpose is, anybody who's listening is saying, well, I don't know what my purpose is. I says, okay, you know what? That's not the issue. The good news is that 40% of the time, most of us are living or leading from our purpose, okay? We just don't know what it is. But, you can look at moments in your life and you go, okay, probably that's when it was happening. The opportunity, though, is the more you can crystallize what is those beautiful words and what is the metaphor that really jumps out for you, is to be able to fully own it every day, especially when it's not around and you need it. That's when it's most useful.
Why do you think that purpose seems to be occupying more and more mind share recently? It seems like there's been, more, sort of talk about it, some more books about it, more interest in it, perhaps. I haven't done a Google, one of those Google Ngrams on purpose, but I imagine if you did, it would kind of be spiking upwards. What do you think it is in the air or in the water that is, driving this growing interest in finding your purpose?
Yeah. So, look, purpose has been around for a long, long, long time. So Marcus Aurelius, who wrote the Emperor's Handbook, who was the Emperor of Rome, and sort of wrote this book, which was sort of mostly his own meditation on sort of what does it mean to lead, talks about purpose, right? But none of our parents probably said, you need to know what your purpose is. Most of our parents may have said, you need to know what your career should be, or no, but purpose was never sort of part of the lexicon. But what's changed, I think, is that we live in a world where I call it the certainty-uncertainty paradox. Okay, so today, for the most part, for anybody listening, within about 15 minutes of you is a Starbucks, and you can order your own customized coffee drink, which includes whatever combination of cocoa milk or whatever the case may be. And you can go to any Starbucks anywhere in the United States, and for all intents and purposes, that unique combination that you want will taste the same. You can order a book and have it custom signed or have it something signed as a gift card, and have it sent and have someone receive it the next day. Okay, I know now. Whenever it's raining, wherever I happen to be, my phone says it's going to start raining in about a minute, and when it's about to stop raining, it says it's going to stop raining in about a minute. Okay, so we have enormous certainty on a lot of things that, for the most part, I don't know if we really care about. We have incredible uncertainty in a set of things that for the last 50 years we took for granted. NAFTA and NATO are having a hard time these days. Okay? The European Union, you can look at you just open the New York Times on a daily basis, and it's just humbling what's shaking. We have 500-year weather events happening biannually. I have a picture of a street sign in Arizona that's melting. The words are melting because it was so hot. So there's just a massive amount of uncertainty. Now, what happens with this massive amount of uncertainty is all the things that we've been standing on, as the solid ground we've stood on, with the strategy, how we're going to execute it, the way the institutions operate, the way the business operates, they're all broken. So what are you going to stand on? And my view is that purpose is the last man standing. It's the ultimate antidote to uncertainty. It's the one thing that doesn't change. And so knowing it becomes even more important, because if you don't have external certainty, where you're going to find it, the only place you're going to find it is inside yourself. And if you're leading today and you're having to make decisions, and you have more data than you've ever had, but the problem is it's less helpful because of the unpredictability of what's going to happen tomorrow. You're going to have to make that decision from someplace. So the thing that has had the most impact for most of the leaders, I interviewed about 80 people for the book, the thing that purpose had as the biggest benefit for them of having their clarity of their purpose was their ability to make decisions in times of uncertainty.
Nick, you've been an independent professional, and would love to hear your thoughts about how purpose relates to independent professionals and the importance for independent professionals of finding their purpose.
Yeah, so if I look at my professional career, so I got sick, and as I got better, I sort of started doing consulting, and I did a bunch of work on strategy execution work for a number of years. And then I got bored with that. I actually grew a business and then decided I just didn't want to do it anymore. And I started looking at some of the material that this is all based on. And I really got into the area of authentic leadership, which is where purpose showed up, because it was one of the key ingredients of authenticity is purpose. And I ended up working on that piece. As an independent consultant doing this stuff, I had spent so many years teaching so much stuff, and I pretty much knew what kind of an outcome I was going to get and how much enthusiasm there was going to be for whatever it was I was doing. So if I was teaching Michael Porter stuff on strategy, I knew how to do the case method, and I knew how to sort of get people engaged, and they would have a good entertaining time. But I was also realistic as to what would be the residual benefit of having done that a year or two later, right? It was a good show. The reality was that when I started doing the purpose work, something else happened. So, and it really sort of took me by surprise, but what it did is it really helped me realize that I was stepping into something that had so much more amperage than anything else I'd ever done before. And at the time, 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, when I was doing this, there was nobody doing this. So if I didn't do it, nobody was going to. So the first place, right before the recession in 2008, I'm working with a Fortune 10 company I'd gotten into through a friend, and we were doing a version of this with the 30 of the top 300, right? And we've been doing this every 3 times a year. And the company's stock went from 56 to 6. And so I was watching this thing melt down, this company of great hubris melting down. But what was interesting was they kept us around. And then they started having people come back from the original programs that we did, and participants would say, so, what have you learned most that's been most useful for you relative to dealing with being successful during the recession? And, they would all sit there and look at them and say, well, you just need to know your purpose. And the first time the first person said that, I literally fell off my chair. I'm like, oh, my God, this thing really works. And this one guy said, look, my purpose is to be the whitewater raft guide that safely gets you to the other side. And when the recession hit, all the bonuses I'd given everybody were gone. And all the stock options I'd given them were useless. And we had to do things in the business we'd never had to do with more difficulty. And we didn't know if we were going to be sold or kept. And the only way I kept that group together is I told them my purpose. And they said, well, Jim, that was the only reason we ever hung out with you in the first place. Now, for him, that story came from his early 20s when he was a professional whitewater raft guide. And he actually had saved people's lives. So he stood on something that was truly solid ground for him. And, for me, I think for all of us as independents, there's something that speaks to us in the work we do, right? And it's listening to that and then following it and just staying in it and to the point where it shows us what we are meant to see that we can't see until we get there. Okay? Well, you're a perfect example of this, which is look at what you're doing now, and there's no linear path to the work that you're doing, right? But if you hadn't followed through on it, you wouldn't be here.
Very, very much a random walk.
Exactly.
You've mentioned a couple of times the sessions that you run, sometimes 2 to 3 day sessions, and I think a lot of them are corporate, and closed to the public. But you also run some that are open to the public. I think you have some upcoming ones. Talk to us about what we would experience if we we're going through one of your 2 to 3 day events.
Yeah. Well, before I do that, I just want to say we worked really hard to get the book to the place where you can get your hands around what the purpose may be. Okay? And so what I'm going to talk about is what the in-the-room experience is. Okay? But I don't want to take away from the fact that the book has its own power. Okay? The in-room experience is we start out when we start out looking at some of this stuff around certainty and uncertainty. And what we start to look at is the reality of why purpose matters in this time right now. And why is it that it has such leverage in this moment? And we've been talking about that already, so I won't go back into it. We also do an exercise where we look at what has us step into our deeper authenticity. Because to do this work, you have to be really authentic with yourself. And one of the exercises we do is we have people look at what is it most people see about them, what is it most people don't see that's a key part of who they are, and where does it come from in their life. And in that answer usually is some of the deepest and most powerful insights about what makes each of us tick and what our life journey and some of our journey with our family systems has been. And as we do that, what it does is it instantly brings a level of transparency and vulnerability and authenticity into the room. So we do this, and most of the work we do usually is in groups of 6. And We then look at the crucible stories, and people tell 3 crucible stories in a row. And they do them in a group of 3, and they start to hear all these stories, and they start to really realize how common some of the common challenges are that we've all faced. Because most of us think that whatever crazy things happened to us, we were the only ones that it happened to. From there, we work on looking at stories of when we've been most proud of who we are and what we've done, and really looking at what are the common strengths, leadership strengths that are in those stories that really begin to help describe purpose, but they really also show what are some of the things that we bring to what we do that is our combination of gifts that show up. We also look at the intrinsic and extrinsic motivations that we all have, and how do we fit that together with the gifts that we have into how much time are we spending doing the thing that is our gift versus doing the stuff that's taking out the trash. Okay? So that, in some sense, covers day 1 of the journey. Day 2 of the journey is really a deep dive into purpose. And this is where, in a group of 6, you end up telling your childhood magical moments, your passions, and a whole series of other questions that we sort of have people think through, that in telling them, we can watch when you step into that place of purpose. We may not know what the words were, but words are that help us access it, but we know when you step into it. And over about half a day, a group of about 6 people will go on a journey of helping each other to uncover what's the set of words that best helps you access your purpose. And it's kind of like a key to that room of purpose for each one of us. We then spend time that afternoon really saying, well, that's great. Now that you have a sense of what it is, that's very helpful for what you need in a cocktail party, but what are you going to do in your life? And how are you going to lead from this purpose more deeply? And we spend the afternoon really having people do the deep reflection and internal thinking and planning and discussing around how are they going to lead from their purpose a factor of 10 more than they ever have in the past, now that they know what it is. And they really put down, in some ways, it's a declaration of independence that each person writes of what is it that they're going to step into and what are they going to honor. And then the group sits down and reviews those and gives each other feedback. And then at some point, we then get everybody to stand and say what is their purpose and why those words that they came up with. And that brings us to the end of the second day. We then continue working with the groups over a couple of months, a couple of conference calls and check-ins to help people refine the journey of how are they going to lead from purpose. Because in some sense, it's not about the words, it's about the actions. And how do you fully step into those? And what does that really look like for you in your life, both work and personal? So that's what we do when we take them. When we do longer programs, we put in some stuff around values. We'll put in some stuff around how do you deal with your weaknesses and how do you transfer them into strengths. And now with the new material in the book, we have a whole other set of material around purposes, relationships with stress and how it changes that. How do you use purpose to make the hard right versus easy wrong decisions in life, and what does that mean? What is the relationship between purpose and our identity? We all have roles and expertise and all kinds of other things, but when those get stripped away, what is left and what is it that purpose can do for us? We have a whole interesting number of things that we're beginning to play with as well. So,
what sort of changes have you seen people making in their non-work life, in their personal lives, after really discovering their purpose?
Yeah, what's interesting is that in some ways that's the place people make more difference, more changes. Because, in some ways, well, let's just wait. I've had the luck in many cases of when I get to do these programs, I'm doing them with senior executives a lot. And most of them are living their purpose fairly effectively on the work side. Okay. The personal side is a little more complicated for many of them. So for many people, it's really been about making real changes in their relationship with their kids and how they're interacting with them, the kind of time they're spending, not just the time, but how they spend their time has been a big change for a number of people. A number of people have cannot tell you how many people, when they do their planning, put down starting to have a date night with their spouse. And I'm like, man, nobody's doing date nights, but it's like it really makes a difference. And it's like, having that special time with your spouse, and what does that mean? And bringing your purpose to that person. So that's just a whole nother level of what this looks like. I've had people decide, I've had a number of people who realized that the roles they had and the things they were doing really were not an expression of their purpose. And they needed to make major changes and needed to move to a different part of the world and truly start the thing that they knew that had always been calling them. So it's a wide range of things.
And this is a little personal, but how would you articulate your purpose, Nick?
So yes, my purpose, I have two ways of phrasing it, okay? One is, this is a version I've had for a good bit of time, is my purpose is to wake you up and have you finally be home. Okay? I think that's a wonderful expression and description of my purpose. But about 3 years ago, one of the participants in the program came up to me and said, Nick, that is not your purpose. Let me tell you what I think your purpose is. I said, your purpose is to be the Gandalf that knocks on my door. And if I open that door, the deeper truth will be revealed and my life will change forever. And as I said that, I was like, oh my God, that's so much better. Because, as a kid, as a teenager, I spent all my teenage years reading those books. It was like, this is where I lived my life for about 3 or 4 years as I was going from a kid to an adult. And so the metaphor was just so poignant for me, right? It's kind of like when Gandalf knocks on Frodo's door at the beginning of Lord of the Rings.
Adventures? Bagginses don't go on adventures.
Seriously, you open that door and it's like, oh my God. And the more people, I cannot tell you how many people, who I've stayed in contact with for many, many years, have said, do you realize how different my life is now from what it would be like if we had not met? And it's not like they're saying it's all good, but it's like, oh my God. I mean, I had a woman who decided to become head of HR for the World Food Program right before the Syria crisis, Ebola, and everything else. And when it all was blowing up, we were talking. She's like, oh my God. It's like, if I knew knowing my purpose was going to get me into this much trouble.
Would have stayed home at Bag End. One question I like to ask all guests is if there's any routines or habits that you have found really work for you, and maybe they're ones that you've had for a long time, or maybe they're a morning routine that you've developed recently, but would love to hear any kind of routines or habits.
There's a whole series of routines and habits. For me, for example, whenever I'm struggling, I always step back and say, okay, if my purpose was working on this problem instead of me, what would be happening here? And there's always a wonderful, clear insight that comes out of that. And in some sense, my purpose at its core is about stepping into the deeper truth, right? And whenever I do that, it's like it forces me to pause, step back, and say, okay, so there's what I'm doing and how I'm reacting, and then there's what would really actually be the deeper truth, and what that would look like. And so in some ways, it gets to the point where it's just a part of you. Okay, so it's a routine. Now, Benjamin Franklin has a wonderful thing he did when he was a man in his journey. And it's something that I actually find very helpful to do. Is at the beginning of the day, you say, what am I going to do today that's an expression of my purpose? Okay. And at the end of the day, you then say, okay, where did I live my purpose, and where could I live it more? Where could I have lived it more fully? And in some ways, it becomes a daily score. Okay. I found that to be a really helpful exercise for me.
Nick, your book is incredibly powerful. You've also got a couple other ones out there, the ones that you co-wrote with Bill George and Scott Schock, right? True North, the Discover Your True North field book, and Finding Your True North, the personal guide, and with your new book. I think this is so relevant and of such focus for a lot of people that this was a great intro, and I hope people check out your book. I'm really enjoying it, and I wanted to really thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, and I really enjoyed this conversation and jumping into this journey of purpose with you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.